Greetings and welcome back to room 303 in our Talks with Walt, as we are calling our readings through the deathbed edition of Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass. We turn now to Song of Prudence. This will be the last time in Leaves of Grass that we will have Song of in any of our titles. Song 2 but not Song of. So this is it for us. Now, this is poem number 9, Song of Prudence, of the 38 of autumn rivulets. I'll again remind you that we have said that autumn representing that which is old and rivulets that which is new. We're going to be focusing here on the transition from past to future, not so much historically but now morally. This may be the most Emersonian, some scholars have argued, of any of the poems of Leaves of Grass. Certainly we're going to, of our 5 Whitmans as we talk about them, this is going to be Whitman the philosopher, no question. A lot of stoicism is going to be, I think, very much in the back of Whitman's mind as we play the game. Now, our assumptions are that you've been with us at learnstrong.net, down that left-hand side, Talks with Walt, from the very beginning. And we, all the way up to and including a set of introductory comments for Autumn Rivulets, and I'm hopeful that you will have studied that as you get ready now to work this set of lines with us. Now, as I turn to our Nortons, we're going to told that except for the 2 opening lines, this 1856 poem is taken practically in its entirety from the 1855 preface and has undergone but minor changes since. In Leaves of Grass 1856, it was called Poem of the Last Explanation of Prudence. In Leaves of Grass 1860, Leaves of Grass number 5, and in the following 3 editions, the title was the poem's first line. In 1881, it took its present title and position, and then Norton's will continue. One of the most Emersonian of Whitman's poems, it may have been influenced by Whitman's lecture on prudence. Emerson's observation that prudence is, quote, the outmost action of the inward life, end quote, and that, quote, everything in nature, even motes and feathers, go by law and not by luck, end quote, strongly supports the poem. A scrap of prose complains that spiritual prudence is nearly altogether omitted in modern formulas and the atmosphere of poems and all the literary products. And Norton's will also let us know that there is, beginning at line 4, although prudence is now familiarly referred to pragmatic caution in worldly affairs, its basic meaning is quote, wisdom conducting to moral virtue and discipline, end quote. And obviously the influence of Stoicism can't be overemphasized. Now, in some ways, this is a almost like poetic verbation of the preface, as we said, namely paragraph 22 of the 1855 preface. Prudence there gets mentioned 11 times, so it's clearly a word that matters for Whitman. We're obviously going to have to get into the definition of it. I want to point out all the economic language of this poem, and that's going to be kind of fascinating, that Whitman the capitalist will be talking a lot about things like inheritance and interest and investments and things of profit and things like this. We're going to point out, though, that prudence for Whitman is something way more than simply caution. Okay, let's get that out of the way now. The word all, and I find this fascinating, the word all is used 21 times in this poem. So the idea of completion, and you could make the argument that all is one and one is all is a part of this. Now, prudence, you'll remember from Song of the Broad Axe, prudence in its place. 6 times it gets used in this poem, and then we're going to see it in vocalism, the first section. Prudence and nakedness will be the reference there. I'd like to remind you, as we open this set of lines, Manhattan streets I sauntered pondering. Hey, do you remember the opening lines of the city dead house, by the gate, as idly sauntering, wending my way from the clangor? And again, that poem and this poem are so radically different, and yet I think they both, for their own reasons, belong in Autumn Rivulets. Let's look at it. Manhattan streets, I sauntered, pondering. You'll maybe remember this one as I ebbed with the ocean of life, number 4. On time, space, reality, remember Song of Myself, passage 46, I know I have the best of time and space. On such as these and abreast with them, prudence. The last explanation always remains to be made about prudence. Little and large alike drop quietly aside from the prudence that suits immortality. And you'll remember this immortality from starting from Palmanock 6. I shall supply myself with the poems of my soul and immortality. And then the formulation of the soul. 58 times already in Leaves of Grass, that formulation has been utilized. 79, almost 80 times in Leaves of Grass, the soul as a phrase gets used. The soul is of itself. All verges to it. Notice again that use of growing language. All has reference to what ensues. All that a person does, says, thinks is of consequence. In other words, this is going to be the fundamental argument of this poem. Everything is connected. In that regards, we'll think of Whitman as one of the great integral thinkers. No question. Everything is somehow integral. Everything is somehow connected. Not a move can a man or a woman make that affects him or her in a day, month, or any part of the direct lifetime or the hour of death, but that the same affects him or her onward afterward through the indirect lifetime. In other words, you are somehow connected to your great-great-great-great-great-grandparents. The decisions that they made is the reason that you're here. Not just those physical decisions, those spiritual decisions as well, for Whitman, will have some kind of effect. And then he continues. The indirect is just as much as the direct. That is to say, the obvious is just as much as the less than obvious. The spirit receives from the body just as much as it gives to the body, if not more. Go back to Song of Myself, passage 48. I said that the soul is not more than the body, and the body is not more than the soul, and nothing, not God, is greater to one than oneself is. Not one word or deed, of course this use of the word word will take us all the way through Leaves of Grass, and obviously the study of the logos and word. Word and deed, obviously when they're put together like this, makes us think of Goethe's Faust, no question. Nor venial sore, now we're going to get the other side of that yin-yang light Taoist symbol, right? Venial sore, discoloration, privacy of the onerous. Now this is interesting because Harold Bloom's made quite a bit of autoeroticism, and as he reads a number of lines in Leaves of Grass. By the way, in The Sleepers, passage 1 and 7, we're going to get onerous for the only other time as it gets used. I will just say, the very fact that the word gets used at all in Leaves of Grass is going to be cause for serious concern on the part of readers. And in 1855, it was there in the preface. Putridity of gluttons or rum drinkers. We're back, of course, to his whole thing about the temperance movement. Peculation, cunning, betrayal. Obviously, all of this makes us think of our Dante, right? Especially the Inferno. Murder, seduction, prostitution. We're back, of course, to his conversations about prostitutes and prostitution. But has results beyond death as really as before death. In other words, there is legacy for all choices made, both morally acceptable and unacceptable. Charity and personal force are the only investments, notice again all the economic language, worth anything. Charity and personal force, that amativeness that he's been working with for so long in Leaves of Grass. No specification is necessary. All that a male or female does, that is vigorous. Now here you're going to get this interesting, starting to get these kind of lists of things that morally are appropriate, propaedeutic. Vigorous, benevolent, clean, is so much profit, again back to the economic language, to him or her, in the unshakable order of the universe and through the whole scope of it forever. This teleological view that everything is somehow connected and it's all building to now. And then of course to come, as we were quoting the idea or the line from that letter that Newton wrote about standing on the shoulders of giants. In other words, there's always something coming, but it's all attributable to what has passed. Who has been wise receives interest. This almost sounds like something from the book of Proverbs in the Bible, right? Again, interest is more economics language. Savage, felon, and now we get an interesting list here. President, judge, farmer. By the way, Norton's wants to let us know that the word prostitute actually appeared between judge and farmer in the 1856 version of this poem only. Sailor, mechanic, literate, young, old, it is the same. The interest will come round, all will come round. By the way, this come round is only used right here in Leaves of Grass. And obviously this is the law of karmic. This is the karmic law. And I think Whitman was very acutely aware of the idea of the karmic law in his early investigations into especially Hinduism and Buddhism. Singly, wholly, to affect now, affected their time, will forever affect. We're back to the use of the word forever as it was as it was early in the poem, all of the past and all of the present and all of the future. Again, notice this repetition of the word all the brave actions of war and peace, all help given to relatives, strangers, the poor, old, sorrowful, young, children, widows, the sick, and to shunned persons. You'll remember this from shunned persons from Native Moments. All self-denial that stood steady and aloof on wrecks and saw others fill the seats of the boats. It's a compelling word picture. The people who decided, for example, to die instead of save themselves. We think obviously of the Titanic, don't we? All offering of substance, again more economic language, all offering of substance or life for the good old cause. You'll remember this a couple of times. It's already been used. Ontario's Shore 12 is one of those most recently. Or for a friend's sake or opinion's sake, all pains of enthusiasts scoffed at by their neighbors. Now this word enthusiast has an interesting history. I'll let you run it to ground. It's a fascinating word in and of itself. It is a religious word, of course, as part of the awakening. All the limitless sweet love and precious suffering of mothers. We're obviously back to the celebration of moms. All honest men baffled is a great word here. All honest men baffled in strifes recorded or unrecorded. All the grandeur and good of ancient nations whose fragments we inherit. All the good of the dozens of ancient nations unknown to us by name, date, location. In other words, culturally speaking, we're the inheritors of all these amazing cultures that came before us, even though we're maybe not completely aware of it. And we know this, for example, as we say at LearnStrong.net, when we pick up the Iliad, the Odyssey, and the Aeneid, and we read it, and of course we see, oh, well, there's the origination or the genesis of a whole bunch of video games that have made us who we are in our generation. All that was ever manfully begun, we're familiar with the use of that word, whether it succeeded or no, all suggestions of the divine mind of man or the divinity of his, again, back to Song of Myself 48, of his mouth or the shaping of his great hands, all that is well thought or said this day or any part of the globe, or in any of the wandering stars, or in any of the fixed stars, by those there as we are here. All that is henceforth to be thought or done, and then for the first time in this poem, by you, whoever you are. And again, it's this intimacy that I think makes Whitman so much fun for people to read, because it's as if he reaches out from the pages of Leaves of Grass and says directly to you, whoever you are, or by anyone, these inure, have inured, and again, this economic language, shall inure to the identities from which they sprang or shall spring. And then he comes back to you. Did you guess anything lived only in its moment? It's fascinating. It's a fascinating rhetorical question. Do you actually believe that what you're doing right here, right now, doesn't have a past and doesn't have a future? It's remarkable. The world does not so exist. No parts palpable, and now we're going to get very Emersonian. No parts palpable or impalpable so exist. No consummation exists without being from some long previous consummation, and that from some other. Without the furthest conceivable one coming a bit nearer the beginning than any. Whatever satisfies souls is true. Now, this is going to be some radical philosophy, right? Because obviously it can be much debated. Is it in fact true? And obviously we'll jump into the whole discussion with Keats and Ode on a Grecian Urn, truth is beauty, beauty, truth. Prudence entirely satisfies the craving and glut of souls. Itself only finally satisfies the soul. The soul has that measureless pride. You'll remember measureless from Song of Myself 46. Never will be measured. The soul has that measureless pride which revolts from every lesson but its own. Remember Open Road, passage 6, and the way in which he said it this way. Now I see the secret of the making of the best persons is to grow in the open air and to eat and sleep with the earth. Here a great personal deed has room. Such a deed seizes upon the hearts of the whole race of men. Its effusion of strength, go back to near in this poem, and will overwhelms law and mocks all authority and all argument against it. Here is the test of wisdom. Wisdom is not finally tested in schools. Go back to the line we were just working with. Wisdom cannot be passed from one having it to another not having it. Wisdom is of the soul, is not susceptible of proof, is its own proof, applies to all stages and objects and qualities, and is content. Is the certainty of the reality and immortality of things and the excellence of things something there is in the flow to the sight of things that provokes it out of the soul? Go back to this line again. The soul has that measureless pride which revolts from every lesson but its own. It's a compelling line. Now, to finish the poem. I breathe the word, again, back to the logos, right, of the prudence that walks abreast with time, space, reality, we're again back to those three, that answers the pride, again, we're back to measureless pride, which refuses every lesson but its own. What is prudence? Is indivisible. In other words, now we're back to this notion of unity. Declines to separate one part of life from another, again, back to an integral perspective. Divides not the righteous from the unrighteous or the living from the dead. I can't tell you how radical this idea is, given that Matthew 25:33 would have been present in the minds of the readers of Whitman's day, when goats and sheep are separated, and the goats go to hell, and the sheep, of course, are invited to paradise. Notice here what he says. Read it again. Prudence divides not the righteous from the unrighteous or the living from the dead. Matches every thought or act by its correlative. Knows no possible forgiveness or deputed atonement. Knows that the young man who composedly periled his life and lost it has done exceedingly well for himself without doubt. Go back to, of course, John 12:25. He that saves his life shall lose it, and he that loses his life shall find it. That he who never periled his life, but retains it to old age in riches and ease. We think of Callicles at in the Platonic dialogues. Of course, we think of those opening lines of Republic as Socrates is having his conversation about, what's it like to be rich and old. Has probably, whoever has periled his life but retains it in old age and riches and ease, has probably achieved nothing for himself worth mentioning. It's an amazing idea. The people who we respect the most are the ones that risk everything, and that for him is prudence. Knows that only that person has really learned who has learned to prefer results. Taking us, of course, to James and his pragmatism, this idea that in the end it is results that matter. Who favors body and soul the same, again back to passage 48, A Song of Myself. Who perceives the indirect assuredly following the direct. Who in his spirit in any emergency, whatever, neither hurries nor avoids death. Well, this is, of course, Marcus Aurelius' Stoicism, which is born of Socrates, and obviously Plato's Phaedo, as well as any number of other texts. What are we going to say about this in terms of messages at 2A? It's pretty radical philosophy. That is to say that everything a person says, everything a person does, everything a person thinks is of some consequence, of some importance. There is no throwaway experience in your life. It all matters. It all is defining who you are. At 2B, I love the Emersonian language. I love the philosophic poetry that we're engaging here. Now, just think about how this poem is so different from so many other poems, although you can go back to Eidolons at the very beginning of our study and obviously pick up on a lot of this. At 3A, I just mentioned Eidolons. Obviously, Emerson's lectures on prudence, as well as compensation, his essay Compensation, that is to say his notion of karma. I've mentioned Marcus Aurelius' Meditations, and obviously Epictetus in his work as well. And here we would tip our hat to, of course, the great Ryan Holiday, who has made Stoicism now something that so many of you guys are following. And I love that about Holiday's work. Of course, what is it that Marcus Aurelius will say in Meditation? Soon you will have forgotten all things, and all things will have forgotten you. That's an important insight, isn't it, for us? No question. At 3B, how about this? What are your thoughts? How do you respond to the argument of this poem, and to what degree do you agree that the whole notion is that we're all connected in this amazing way, and all of the events of our life are somehow remarkably connected, even though we don't completely understand it? Maybe your reading of Leaves of Grass is a part of that connection. Thank you.